Hey, welcome to Planet Hex. I'm Andrew Horn. This is a show I talk about a lot of VHS tapes. Speaking of which, video nasties. There's a lot said about the video nasties era and like the worth of the tapes, but that seems to be the main focus for many collectors at the moment, is what these tapes are worth and not the act of watching them. Now, I have a bunch of the nasties. I don't have the original copies, but I do have them on bootlegs that I was given as a gift from my friend who's clearing out their dad's loft. This was just after the first edition of vhsatemybrain came out. So it would be nice to put it in the original edition, but there is some stuff in there in the revised edition of vhsatemybrain, which is out now, as is the sequel. But I thought on this video, I'm going to go through some of those nasties that I've got and rewatch them and see what it's actually like to watch those forbidden tapes. This was a strange era. The video nasties era here in the UK was a period where films were demonised, where 72 films were demonised and went through so much trouble. If you owned them, if you were circulating them, if you were renting them out in your stores, you could get in a lot of trouble. In some cases with the prosecuted ones, you could get taken to prison, you could lose your livelihood. Everything would get burned. So many videotapes were burned. So many VHS tapes were just thrown into furnaces. There's footage of that out there, actually, of these things being thrown into furnaces. And to think of the cultural impact these had, without the public really understanding what was on these videotapes, that was really strange. These things were demonized to the point where it was like, if you even went near one of these, it seemed like it would corrupt you. It seemed like it would destroy civilization. Society would fall because of these VHS tapes, of all things. Now, there was a lot going on in the 80s that did damage society, but VHS tapes really wasn't one of them. These movies didn't really have that much of an effect on a lot of people. These that were... the controversy around them was blown up because of a sizzle reel. There was a tape made that had all the most violent, most reprehensible, abhorrent things going on in it from these movies. Now, those films that were prosecuted, the things that were on that tape, they made up, maybe 5% of the entire running time of a lot of these movies, if that. But when it was presented and shown, that's how it was seen. It was seen as obscene. It was seen that these things were brutal and these were terrible. So they were taken out of context in many cases. Some of them weren't taken out of context. Things like, Cannibal Holocaust, Island of Death, things that were just needlessly brutal, needlessly awful. But some of them were just terrible. Films like Forest of Fear. Why was that on there? Not Nightmare Maker, the other one I'm thinking of, Night of the Bloody Apes. Night of the Bloody Apes, for example. Terrible, terrible film. Shouldn't be on the list. And the reason it got on there was because of some stock footage of heart transplants. It was a really strange era, really weird era. We were coming out of what was a relatively positive era in the 70s into quite a bleak era in the 80s with a lot of things going on in society. And it seemed that the media needed something to demonize, and they chose horror movies, and they chose these exploitative movies. Yep, a lot of them were very exploitative. A lot of them had a lot of sexual content, and a lot of them had a lot of violence in them, but not to the extent that was always put across, that these things would just destroy minds. Some of those films were very effective. Nightmares in a Damaged Brain, for example. Nightmare Maker, otherwise known as Butcher Baker, Nightmare Maker was very effective. And then you've got things at the other end of the spectrum. You've got things like zombie flesh eaters. You need to read up about the DPP list itself. It is a fascinating read. I do recommend my own content about it from vhsatemybrain's revised edition, which I do recommend wholeheartedly because I put my heart and soul into that. But I do recommend just having a look around online about stuff to do with the DPP's Video Nasties banned list and what wasn't on the ban list, and the Section 3 tapes that were sort of associated but never really listed as a video nasty. Even things like Scanners are on there. There's some familiar titles on there if you go through it. So let's go and take another shown. That's how it was seen. It was seen as obscene. It was seen that these things were brutal and these were terrible. So they were taken out of context in many cases. So what's the experience like of actually watching these movies? It's a strange experience because a lot of these films are now past uncut. A lot of them are available worldwide. Here in the UK, many of them have been reduced from their 18 status or the banned status to a 15 and are released uncut at a 15. And that blows my mind. I've mentioned this before. I've mentioned it in the VHS Ate My Brain books, VHS Ate My Brain column I did, and here on this channel, in the podcast, all over. The thought that these things cause people to lose their livelihoods and in some cases do prison time is really strange. And it speaks of a very different era and a very different attitude towards censorship, a very different attitude towards violence on screen. And I think here in 2025, we are desensitized to a lot of these things to a point where they are no longer deemed to be that corrupting. But is that for the best? Is that a good thing? There are things in these movies, I fully admit, there are things in the video nasties that are really unpleasant. And that was the point of them. That was the point of these films. But they weren't made just with the intent of them becoming part of this list. Putting these films together onto this list caused them to become something more. And that was a mistake. I don't think that the controversy around them did anything towards them being, taken out of people's consciousness. It just made them have more and more interest. And over the years, they've gained more and more notoriety. And that's why rubbish like Forest of Fear or Unhinged and things like that, that's why these are still finding an audience out there with film fans, with people that are just curious about what the hell happened with that weird era. There were some morally reprehensible things going on in those films. I, again, freely admit that. And not all of them are to my taste. In fact, a lot of them are not to my taste. But there is an interest in these films. There is still a curiosity about them. What if they do hold some kind of strange influence, some kind of strange power within those little black boxes of magnetic tape? It's a very strange thing to think of. It's a weird era to think of. But here now, with so much stuff available online, on streaming services, and on physical media, things that were previously seen as, morally vile are freely available at the touch of a button to anyone. Now, there may be something wrong in that. There may be some stuff that needs to be done about age verification on things, but I don't know how this could be done with streaming services or the internet, of course. So I'm at a loss as to what could be done here. But the fact that these things cost people their lives, it's a crazy thought. It's a crazy thought. I do miss a lot of things about the 80s and the 90s, just on a personal level, because I'm nostalgic for those times. That was my era. That was the time I was growing up. But what did that entire era really achieve other than making people more aware of these movies? It didn't. It didn't really achieve anything beyond just making them notorious and giving them a life far beyond what would be expected for things of that ilk. But anyway, if you want to read more about these, do check out my books, VHS Ate My Brain 1 and 2. There's also some great documentaries out there, such as the Video Nasties, the Definitive Guide. There's one called just Video Nasty. There's a bunch out there. Just search on Google. You'll find a bunch of content to read, lots of things to watch on this subject. But it's an interesting one that continues to fuel a lot of my interest in my passion for VHS. It's a strange era that is long, long since gone, and it needs to be captured. For now, thank you for watching this episode of Planet Hex.